Home, which is an organization that helps high school and college students to get involved by launching their very own Walker Home clubs to educate students and bring awareness to human trafficking in their communities. Susan's current list of service extends to the board chair for the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, the advisory committee for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, the founder and president of SRI Media, Inc., and the co-chair of Community Assessment of Human Trafficking Activity in Metro Philadelphia for International Justice Mission. Susan is also partnered with congressional representatives to draft Duty to Report Sexual Assault Act and is an active member of Chester County Anti-Trafficking Coalition. In 2017, Susan was a congressional award recipient for the Victims' Rights Eva Murillo Unsung Hero Award. So with that, I would like to welcome in Susan Ingram.
Good morning, everybody. I was almost ready to say good afternoon. Thank you so much, Jim and Lauren, for the invitation. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank all of you who are present today to learn about human trafficking. I'm going to make an assumption that many of you maybe have heard about human trafficking, but today we're really going to get in depth. And hopefully at the end of this presentation, not only will you have an understanding, but you will also have hope in what each one of us can do to be able to identify the signs of human trafficking and ultimately to save victims. So with that, we're going to get started on our presentation. All righty, so the first thing we're going to talk about is, what does human trafficking look like in the United States? Most people probably aren't aware of the fact that there's two types of trafficking. There is sexual trafficking and there is labor trafficking. Labor trafficking would be to work in farms and restaurants and areas illegally, being brought into this country or even within this country to do that type of work with very little compensation. But the majority of, as you can see, 82% of trafficking is defined as sex trafficking. When we look at who these people are, there's sometimes this misinformation related to who are these victims. And when we look at different movies, we start to get the sense that it's mostly international. And when you look at these stats, 91% of trafficking victims are US citizens. The gender, again, is typically female, about almost 94%, although we are seeing more victims coming from either the transgender area or that are male. So we are seeing, again, a big difference in how much trafficking is now moving towards different areas, and in fact, with younger children. We need to understand what the definition of human trafficking is. So we look at what the US Code is and how they defined it. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transport, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for a commercial sex act. And the three main areas that it addresses is it force, is it fraud, or is it coercion? And of course, anyone under the age of 18 years old is automatically considered trafficking. So again, it's a bit of a misnomer to use the word trafficking. It's not necessarily related to moving one person from one location to another. It's related to, was there force involved? Was there some type of fraud or false promise of something in return, which turned out to not be true? Or is it coercion, again, which would be manipulation and other ways of luring people in? And again, we're going to talk about that in a little more detail later. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal enterprise, and it is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. It recently overtook drugs as the number one criminal activity. And as you can see there, when you stack it up against some of these major corporations and the revenues that they generate, it still is less than the money that's being made through human trafficking. And the reason why the numbers are so big, one girl represents between $100,000 to $200,000 per year. And a pimp or a trafficker, if he can create what's called a stable of girls, and we're typically looking at around 4 or more, the trafficker is making $1 million a year. So it's not like drugs that you sell once. A person is a commodity that can be sold 8 to 10 to 20 times a day. Sex trafficking is defined as child pornography, child exploitation, child prostitution, pimp-controlled prostitution and sex tourism. One of the questions that I get a lot, and I have to try to remain patient because people don't understand the field of human trafficking. The question is, what about the people that just want to do it? And we're going to talk about this in a later slide. If I said to you that any job or vocation had people that were in that area, of which 96% of them had been traumatized and assaulted as children, and now they're being moved into a criminal activity without even an awareness, because it was learned as a child that their self-worth was defined as being bought and sold. So when we say that somebody chooses prostitution, we have to look at the facts. We have to look at their backgrounds. We have to look at the crimes that were committed against them when they were children. The places where the traffickers are moving the girls to be sold for sex would be in hotels and motels, obviously across the internet and all social media, strip clubs, escort services, truck stops. Again, very a well-known place to bring the girls, military bases, schools, homes, commercial brothels, fronted businesses. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in a slide too. These would be what appears to be legitimate massage parlors, and then major sporting events, because the traffickers are moving the girls, and again, sometimes boys, to the locations where they know that men are going to pay for sex. Who are the buyers? Now, as you can see depicted from this image, this person is portrayed as being probably high net worth, with the watch and the clothes and the ring. And that is exactly who we're identifying who many of the buyers are, those who make over $100,000 a year. And we're going to get into it right here. In one's lifetime, we have researched 8,200 men throughout the United States. And again, this is not global research. This is just here in the United States. 20% have paid for sex during their lifetime. But then you get into where the concentrated area of the buyers are. 25% of frequent buyers comprise 75% of the market. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because if we want to look at reducing demand, we need to think about how we go about doing that. There's been a shift in the way that we think about arresting, and I don't call them prostitutes, I call them prostituted women, because no longer are we looking at them as the criminals. We are looking at them rightly now as the victims, and we need to go after the sellers, the pimps and the traffickers, and the buyers. There is no trend that we're able to find on the race or sexual orientation. Typically, they make over $100,000 a year. The average cost of a transaction is $100, and it is estimated in the United States, the commercial sex market is $5.7 billion. The United States is actually considered a destination area for people around the country to come here for the specific purpose of purchasing sex. And in fact, we've had men come into our major cities who are only here for a day or two and arrange to have sex with a trafficking victim and then return to their area outside the United States. The high frequency buyers are most likely to visit the illicit massage business. We're going to talk about that in a future slide. Very high profile case by the name of Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots. Again, a high frequency, high net worth individual who was arrested, not charged, not prosecuted, and there were no consequences, but he was charged with having sex with human trafficking victims at a massage business, I believe it was called Orchid Spa in Florida. So we know that that's where a lot of the trafficking occurs. Why men buy sex? So I'm involved with a group called the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and they were given a grant to go sit and interview men in prison in Germany who were arrested for either being the trafficker or being the buyer. And they wanted to understand through this research, why do men buy sex? We need to look inside the mind of a buyer to try to understand why they're looking to have sex with a stranger and what is the benefit to them. And in fact, one of them said, being with a prostitute is like having a cup of coffee. Once you're done with it, you can throw it out. It is a meaningless, impersonal interaction. They say it makes it easier to treat them worse. She said no. And I said, sorry, what do you mean no? This is what I paid for. And then the last one, which was recently presented by a speaker who runs a safe house out in Nevada, interviewed someone, and he said, I'm paying for the right to not care about you. So I want you to think about the context in which this goes beyond just again, an interaction with a person for the intent of having sex. This is something that basically says, I don't consider you a human. I consider you to be an object, and I am going to have the right to do whatever I want, and you have to be willing to go along with it. These are some very, very high profile cases, and I'm going to try and move this so I can see this a little bit better. And this runs across the board. So we've got a teacher, an athlete, an actor, a priest, and a billionaire exploiting children and women for their sexual gratification. If you look into the faces of them, some of them are a little more high profile than others, you probably wouldn't get any sense that lurking behind those smiles, lurking behind what appears to be ordinary looking men, are men who have not only a disregard for women, but an actual propensity to want to use them, again, as if they are a commodity or livestock. Richard Kemp is a high school teacher. He was arrested for soliciting middle and high school boys for sex. Then we have Lamar Odom, high profile case. He almost died in a brothel, and he shared in his 2020 memoir that as a young NBA player, he, Kobe Bryant, and other players would buy some, I'm not going to say the word because it's demeaning to women, would buy some pee on the strip because they wanted to have sex with a white girl. We've probably all heard about Charlie Sheen. He was known to hire prostitutes on a frequent basis. He hired women, prostitute women, without disclosing to them that he was HIV positive. Again, complete disregard for their physical health and well-being. Robert McWilliams, a priest, he was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to child trafficking, child abuse, and child exploitation. This occurs more often than most people know, posing as a teenage girl to lure in young boys online. We have a case with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. They have a lawsuit against Twitter. A boy was lured in by someone posing as a girl. He ended up giving them nude photographs and video. It was uploaded to Twitter. The parents begged Twitter to take it down. For 9 days, Twitter ignored them, said it wasn't in violation of their standards. Eventually, they pulled it down. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation, I will refer to as NCOSE, has now successfully sued them, and it's moving up through the court system. And hopefully this will have a major impact, not just on Twitter, but other platforms that feel like they are absolved of the content that appears on their sites. And then, of course, we talked about Robert Kraft. He purchased, and when I say sex slave, that's not an overstatement. These were Asian women who were forced to sleep inside this spa on dirty mattresses, and they literally never left there. And it was filmed through the police, through law enforcement. And the justification and why there was no penalties for him was because public said, well, he's a widower, so it's not rape. He was just satisfying his sexual needs. And therefore, again, there were no repercussions to him. Who are the traffickers? Well, part of this is the culture glamorizing pimps. There's a book written by a pimp. There is a well-known pimp, Snoop Dogg, who now has gone on to great fame with an acceptance of his past. And again, the way he treated and abused women. And these were from his own words. As a kid, I dreamed of being a pimp. I dreamed of having cars and clothes and bitches to match. I did a Playboy tour, and I had a bus follow me with 10 bitches on it. I could fire a bitch, F a bitch, get a new hoe. It was my program. City to city, T to T, hotel room to hotel room, athlete to athlete, entertainer to entertainer. A lot of athletes brought P from me. He's proud of it. We glamorize it. We dress up as pimps in costumes. We have no real cultural appreciation or horror at the fact that 96% of the victims of these pimps were once little girls and little boys who were sexually raped, beaten, brutalized, and traumatized. And for some reason, we as a culture are not standing up and fighting for their right to have the life that was given to them. Because again, we're not really going deep into the background of these prostituted women. When I hear a comedian use the word hoe or whore, or I hear it in a lot of contemporary music, again, we are further creating a sense with all those victims that we don't care about them. And I know, and I'm ecstatic to be doing this presentation, because it's the greatest groups of people that I speak to are college students, high school students. Your generation cares about social justice more than any other generation that I have watched in my time. So I hope that this presentation and learning about human trafficking will help you understand we need to care about those women. We need not to minimize and diminish them and call them names after the trauma that they were forced into as children. This is a look at the people that have been arrested. In 46% of the cases, the victim knew the recruiter. Often this happens on social media. You have no idea who you're talking to. You have no idea whose phone number you're giving. You have no idea who you're meeting. We have many examples of even young men posing as the boyfriend, giving her all the attention, especially children that come out of foster homes, children from homes with drug addiction. They are children. They want love, and they supply and fulfill the love in order to manipulate them. They use fraudulent job offers. This comes under the category of fraud. They offer them modeling jobs or jobs. Even in DoorDash, we see trafficking victims working in what appear to be acceptable type of companies. 31% of the cases, the family members sold their children for sex. And this is probably one of the most shocking stat that I'm going to share with you. And actually, I was watching a presentation yesterday. A woman runs a safe house in the DC area. She said the girls that she has with her, it's more like 45%. Now, the question is, why would a family member sell their children? And it's parents and grandparents. And it can come down to just extreme levels of poverty. It can come down to the fact that this has just been passed down through the generations within this family. That's what you do. You know, incest is not new. Raping of children is not new. This has been around since the beginning of time. And now there's looking for an opportunity to make money. Again, it could be related to drug addiction as well. I shared a story before we got on this call about a Wawa in Lancaster, where a woman who went to Wawa noticed that on 2 days of the week, a car would pull into the parking lot and would transfer children into the other car. Then the next day, they would meet again, and the children would get back into the first car. And when they finally contacted the police, they arrested the people involved because they were trafficking their children just for the night. So again, when you look at these profile, these pictures, this is across the board. These are men, these are women, these are white, these are black, these are Latino. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do, you can be a trafficker. What are the different channels? How do we get the access, to the victims? Well, right here is one primary source, and this is actually pulled from the internet. What's interesting too is in these ads, if you use certain code words like tiny or small or little or petite, that's code language for they're selling kids. And the buyers know that. So if you look at some of these ads that are on here, and they're identifying them, right there, one says teen or Asian or sweet girl. So we know that this is related to the buyers wanting to, again, buy children, which is becoming much more of a worrisome trend than we've seen in the past. This I pulled from a site that law enforcement uses as well to identify where the illicit massage parlors are. It's astonishing to me and most people who see this, that you can actually easily go onto the internet and you can find any town in the United States exactly where the illegal trafficking storefronts are located. And you can see there's a few here that I've referenced in Lancaster. They show you the cost per hour. They tell you what kind of massage, whether it's Latino or black or Asian. They talk about whether you can pay with credit card or cash. And then if you become a member, you can go deeper into this and you can get reviews on all of the different women that work there and what type of services that you can get. And there is nothing that is off limits in terms of the sexual crimes being committed at these locations, which is exactly where Robert Kraft was arrested. I'm very very excited and hopeful about what's going on in Lancaster. I know as students at Franklin and Marshall, many of you are probably from outside the area, but since you go to school there, and it's a relatively small town, wholesome town. I actually have friends who live in the Lancaster area, love spending time there. And I'm just really grateful to see that the district attorney, Heather Adams, launched for the first time just a few months ago, the Human Trafficking Task Force to bring together all of the local, state, federal government agencies with organizations to combat human trafficking. And what that really means is they're going to start doing things like what they did just last month. They want to identify what the demand looks like. So they placed an online ad offering sex for sale and advertised where they would be meeting, the name of the hotel. In 8 hours, 100 people responded. They interacted with the undercover female officer to make arrangements to meet with her. And then 14 showed up and they were arrested. A lot of times people do not understand how people can become victims. And again, it goes back to force, fraud, or coercion. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in greater detail, but they depend on their traffickers for housing or food or money, either because they're spiraling into drug addiction or the trafficker, the first time he was able to get them or her to agree to it, he said, just take this drug. It'll make it easier. Knowing that, again, that's coercion, manipulating her or him into a drug-induced state and then making them be dependent on the trafficker. And I don't think any of us can truly understand what it would be like to have nowhere to live, no home to go to, no idea where you're going to get your next meal. And you have someone who appears to be kind, who continues to tell you that I love you, nobody else understands you, I will take care of you. When you're in that situation, that can cause you to move into situations that turn out to be trafficking and you never saw it coming. So that's why Heather Adams is saying we strengthened our relationships with the victim service providers to get victims in the position that they need to get help. One of the organizations I'm involved in, I'm the board chair of the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance. It's exactly what we do. We have a referral service. We just had our 1000th referral of a victim looking for housing across the United States. And we are a network of residential programs that allow that woman to come and live for free for 12 to 24 months in order to get rehabilitated. And as Heather said, many people might not recognize it exists here in Lancaster County. It does. It's everywhere. Recruitment. Here are the vulnerabilities. You probably may have heard of the expression adverse childhood experiences. We call them ACEs. When you look back at a child's experience, typically it's a family member who was depressed or addicted to alcohol or in prison, physical, emotional neglect. It makes them feel, again, so drawn in to that pimp or trafficker who's offering them all the things that they didn't get as a child, witnessing a mother being abused, feeling like she has no self-worth because that's what she identifies with, physical, sexual, and verbal abuse. People with an ACE score of 4, again, fitting into any one of those categories, 7 times more likely to be alcoholic, increases risk of emphysema and chronic bronchitis, and again, shortens their lifespan. Adverse child experiences of sex trafficking victims. Again, this goes back to, we need to understand women don't choose to go out and sell their bodies and be beaten and abused and to be disrespected by pimps and traffickers and buyers. 96% of them were little girls and little boys. They didn't even have a chance, even as young children. And now they're stuck in a world of complete trauma. 70% come from fatherless homes. 85% grew up in homes with addicted family members. And I'm thinking most of you probably can't even relate to this because this is not how we grew up. But I feel, for me, I have a passion and a calling and a responsibility to care about the people who grew up very differently than me. 50% are self-injurers, 70% have STD or Hep C positive. And of course, they're dealing with bipolar depression, anxiety, and PTSD. The bonding tactics, there's a lot. I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but obviously it's a lot of verbal and mental abuse. These are real, actual stories. And I don't like to share too many of them because they're very graphic and they're very traumatizing just to listen to the story. One of them here is identified as punishing or killing a victim or animals in front of others. I have one of the most disturbing stories about that being done on a regular basis in order to instill complacency among the girls, or refusing and withholding food to the point where she's so desperate she starts eating rocks until her stomach's so filled with rocks that she has to be rushed to the emergency room to have surgery. Again, they induce drug addiction. They control them by threatening to leave them on the streets or turning them over to the police. They take away her identity. They take away her license. If she's international, they take away her passport. There's nowhere for her to go to escape. They deny her entitlement. They typically put one woman in charge of the stable. They call her the bottom bitch. She will be beaten if she does not make sure that she is keeping them in line. And of course, there's a gang membership, and you have to adhere to that code. 3 areas that, according to our United States Code, that defines trafficking was there force that was used? Confinement, captivity, starvation, torture, rape. Were there deceptive offers? And this is probably the biggest, most significant area on social media. Were they lured in? Again, it's often the romance. Nobody understands you. Promise of a better life, jewelry, trips, dinners, an offer of a job. And is there psychological manipulation? Are they threatening you, your family, or threatening, again, to turn you over to the police? Who are the victims? The mindset of a victim is that they have no feeling of self-worth. They blame themselves for everything. They feel loyalty. And I know this is a concept that's hard to grasp, but if it is all you've ever known, and this person at times does show you kindness and love, you will grab hold of that little morsel. And that other 99% of the time that you're in fear, that you feel shame or guilt, or that you're being beaten, you overlook it just to have some love, even if it's just so small. What happens to the girls? If you look at the far left picture, you're going to see what they look like before they were trafficked. And then over time, you see what happens to them because of beatings, because of drug addiction, because of abuse, because of trauma. The average lifespan for a human trafficking prostituted person is 7 years. And again, want to make sure that we don't look at human trafficking as a separate issue or entity outside of prostitution. They are one and the same. I also need to make a point here that often the pimps and the traffickers use the victims in pornography. When we looked at the top 50 pornography images and videos, 88% showed violent aggression to women. They are not agreeing to that. These are not women who signed up for this. Even in the case of a woman who decides on her own to be involved in a pornographic film, by the time she gets on the set and the filming begins, and this is told through experts, there's well-documented research, she is abused, she is ripped, and she is bleeding. So when you see a porn film, please understand what you're looking at in most cases is rape and brutality. And every single person, whether you're listening right now and you're female, at one point, if you're male, you're probably going to have a little girl or maybe a sister or a female in your life. Think about what that would feel like to watch these women depicted in that way. We've got to care about human trafficking victims and prostituted women. What can we do? Because every presentation, certainly as heavy as this type of topic and issue, needs to have hope. And we do have hope. Here's what you can do. And this was told to me by the Director of Homeland Security in Philadelphia. And he said, we need every one of us to be the boots on the ground. Homeland Security, the FBI, the law enforcement can only do so much. I've actually reported what I thought was illicit massage places near where I live, outside of Philadelphia, and the police were informed and then went and did a search and found the mattresses on the floor. So when we're looking, typically a massage place is you're going to have blankets or curtains over the windows so nobody can see in. You're going to have certain code words that are used to describe it. So we need to be looking always, eyes open, ears alert to what we see that looks unusual. And that's not saying that we intervene, because that would be unsafe for the victim, because that could mean that victim could be beaten. What Homeland Security is saying is, if you believe that it is an emergency situation, you call 911. And only you can determine that. If you believe that it looks unusual, but you're not sure, you can call the trafficking hotline. So again, if you see a victim, particularly those in middle school, high school, showered with gifts, money, or attention, it seems to be a fast-moving romantic relationship. Typically, the person seems wealthy or maybe older. It seems way too close a relationship to meet with someone, to have with someone they just met in social media. It appears to be too good to be true. And they're recruiting them for a job opportunity that requires them to travel out of town. And girls have done this. They've gotten on buses, they've gotten on planes, and they were never seen again. We offer 3 different areas to get involved. Walker Home, which is my nonprofit, helps to educate students in the way that students actually are the ones that are sharing with other students. What are the signs of human trafficking? What can you do to help? We have Walker Home clubs. And Lauren, who's at Franklin and Marshall, who's part of this program, was actually at Ruston High School, which was the very first high school in Westchester, Pennsylvania, 5 years ago, to launch a Walker Home club. What they did was phenomenal. They showed a movie, they had a big community night, they sold food. We sat out in the lawn watching it on a blow-up screen. And a lot of people showed up, but we also had education. I had a person from Homeland Security speak, I spoke. It doesn't necessarily have to be this heavy, hard type of presentation. You can mix it in with, let's just all come together. Let's do this as a community. And then, of course, the 2 organizations that Walker Home is affiliated with, in terms of any money that we raise, they are our beneficiaries. We want to support their work. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation primarily is an advocacy group. They propose legislation. They file lawsuits. They have a lawsuit now against what's called MindGeek. MindGeek owns Pornhub, which is the largest porn site on the internet. And again, the reason is they found, when they did their research, about 15,000 videos of children being raped and assaulted. And they're supposed to have a pre-screening process. Nobody was doing that. We also know at Pornhub, you can illegally film someone in a sex act, and you can upload that also to Pornhub. So that lawsuit, again, is moving through the court system. The National Traffic Children Alliance, I am so grateful, so honored, so blessed to be the board chair of this organization, who for the last 4 years has built up a robust network of residential programs across the United States, which are really taking the most broken people and transforming their lives and giving them hope, giving them job opportunity skills, getting them financially secure. And it's working, and it's working well. So again, there is hope for even the most traumatized young man or young woman. Again, this is a little more detail on NCOSE, what they provide. I encourage you to please go to their website. They have a dirty dozen list of the most corporate offenders in terms of exploitation, and you can get involved by sending out emails. They give you all sorts of activist types of programs. So the site is endsexualexploitation, I think it's .com or .org. But again, it gives you an idea. We have an annual global summit, which is free online. Last time we did it, it's typically in the summer. We had 22,000 advocates from 112 countries around the world. And when I say that they are working, they just opened up the international office in London. They are probably the biggest, most powerhouse resource fighting and preventing sexual exploitation and trying to reduce demand from buyers. Again, the NTSA links together survivors with residential programs. Prior to NTSA's existence, there was no way to do that. The rapid referral service is going to become, I think, even more effective by partnering with Microsoft, so that now we're going to be able to have a scrubbing of the internet of all of the phone numbers that are used to sell sex. And through this technology that Microsoft is building, we're going to be able to reach out and send a text to those victims and be able to share with them, there is a safe house 2 miles from you. If you're interested, contact us. So that technology is probably about 6 months out, but it should start to revolutionize how we can not only reach these victims, but also to find them safe housing. Walker Home, here's what we do, high schools and college clubs. It's up to you. You run it, you create your events. We like each club to do about 2 events a year. We are at several colleges and high schools. We're really kind of trying to build this program. Any funds that you raise, in addition to the awareness, goes to our 2 beneficiaries that I just talked about. Your creativity has no boundaries. You could do whatever you want in terms of just having a fun event that also lends itself to understanding what is human trafficking and why you're doing it and why it matters. Of course, this is where I'm going to introduce Anna, who is on this call, and this is a little bit of a surprise to her. Anna now goes to Marist College. She was the founder of the Walker Home Club. I met her at an anti-trafficking coalition meeting. She boldly walked up to me as a high school senior and asked me about starting a Walker Home Club. And I go, well, I've never heard of that, but I love the idea. So she launched it. It was extremely successful. She's also gotten very involved with the National Trafficking Shelter Alliance in internships and in paid positions. So in her words, Anna said, I am thrilled to have launched the first Walker Home Club. Whatever your club looks like, know that what you do could save a life. So I hope and encourage anybody out there at Franklin and Marshall, or any of your friends at other colleges, if you have any interest in working with us and helping victims, helping other students understand ways in which they could be victimized, please reach out to me and I'll have my contact information at the end of this. That's it. I am wrapping up now, actually a little early, because my favorite part of a presentation is not me talking, but it's hearing from you and any questions or thoughts or ideas. I really want to hear from you. This is a growing area where we're trying to get more people involved, because it's of the magnitude of it being the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. So with that, I am going to stop the presentation and welcome your questions.
Wow. I'm having a hard time finding words. We have some questions that have come in already. And let me remind everybody that you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to submit a question. A question from a staff member says, if language is important, as in, quote, prostituted women, why do we not say pay for rape instead of pay for sex when it involves minors exploited by this trade? By definition, no one can, quote, have sex with a child, right? Thanks for this important talk.
Well, in answer to her suggestion, I agree with her. It takes time for a culture to shift their thinking. And again, when we've got late night TV hosts talking trash about prostituted women and using defamatory words to describe them, it breaks my heart. And if people understood that these are damaged little girls and boys, they would refer to that as paid rape. And that's not just of children, that's of adult women as well.
Your point about, understanding better the backgrounds that people damaged in this way come from, I think is really important. One of the things perhaps that makes many of us assume it can't possibly be as bad as it is, but the numbers are just staggering. Here's a question from a faculty member. You said that, quote, human trafficking and prostitution are one and the same, end quote. But doesn't that assertion erase other kinds of coerced labor? I didn't hear you mention convict labor, which is enforced by confinement and coercion. And while you briefly mentioned undocumented migrants, you didn't mention the meat and poultry industry, which infamously exploits migrant laborers.
Everything in that is absolutely true. My presentation and my work has been focused entirely on sex trafficking. So I'm not really an expert in the area of labor trafficking, except to the extent that I understand that obviously, particularly when we have so many immigrants coming into this country, these are undocumented workers. It's much more difficult to be able to identify and investigate if there are illegal workers. That is, again, not my area of expertise. Mine is purely devoted towards understanding and finding ways in which we can reduce demand for human trafficking and prostituted women, as well as to restore the survivors.
Mm. Another staff member asks, could you comment on the pervasive rape culture within male fraternities?
You know what? That is such a great question. So when we go to the Global Summit, or we hear speakers at the Global Summit, each year we're shown videos of what's going on college campuses. And of course, we've probably all seen some of the images that they've shown in different programs on Netflix about spring break, and how women are so coerced into believing that this is acceptable behavior. And there's not recognizing or an awareness that they are being a victim because of the male's interpretation of what the role of a female is. It absolutely is a rape culture. In fact, one of the films that we watched showed a bunch of guys talking about having sex with women. And they were laughing as they said, when a woman says no, she means yes. And when she says yes, she means anal. Like, he is just thinking of the ways in which, much like a buyer of a prostituted woman, what he can do to gratify himself with a complete disregard for the woman. We're also seeing an increased number of sexual assaults on college campuses, of which 90% are never reported. I myself am a victim of sexual assault at Massage Envy. I was the first case to be able to break through the $1.3 billion corporate veil of Massage Envy out in Arizona. There were 180 cases. It was highly profiled in BuzzFeed article back in 2017. And again, in my case, where this person got into the massage business specifically for the opportunity to assault women. And that happens more often than what we even know. In my case, there were 11 women before me who said nothing. In my case, this guy had already assaulted 2 other women, and Massage Envy covered it up. So the concern here is that, getting back to your question, is if women normalize abuse. You know, Dr. Gail Dines, well-known, well-respected sociology professor in, I think it's Rhode Island, interviewed middle school girls. And again, what I'm about to share should not only alarm every one of us listening to this, it should make you so angry that you are motivated to do something about it. Each one of these middle school girls said, I either feel invisible or effable. Meaning that in the way in which a boy, and you know what, I'm not even going to blame the boys. They're in this trash culture as well. They reach out to a girl via text and says, you're really hot. And these are from the words of the middle school girls. And she responds, and then he says, send me a nude pic. That is modern day dating. She either chooses at that point to do that or feels invisible. She doesn't become a girl. And what girl, or even a boy, doesn't like the attention of someone? So once she decides that she's going to step away, she's now feeling very isolated. It's a very hard, harsh world that our kids live in. And I could go on and on with lots of different topics, but one of the big issues too is the average age that a child is looking at pornography is 5 to 7. If you can imagine what that does to the human brain when you are seeing these images, and your brain says, this is what the culture is doing, this is what I should be doing. We have books written now, starting from 3 to 5, good pictures, bad pictures, to help train our children when they should know when to report it and when to look away.
In some ways, I mean, the aspect of, popular culture that you described, sexting and everything, the thing that's extraordinary is that it's taken us so long and that we're still surprised by the scale of this industry that has grown out of it. A faculty member asks, is there evidence that publishing the names of men arrested in sex sting operations in the local newspaper is an effective deterrent?
That's a great question. That is a conversation that we've been having for years. I sat at a retreat last summer with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and 30 of us in a room bantering about whether that is something we should do. Then we talked about repercussions. What if there was suicide? What if it was the person? What if it was somebody in the family? You know, what would be the trickle down effect of doing something so publicly? So we're wrestling with that. I asked the district attorney in my area, why aren't we doing that? And his response, and this is typically the response, we don't want to ruin their lives. Now, I'm going to ask each one of you, after you've heard me describe the victimization, the abuse, the assault, the traumatizing of girls and boys, should our primary concern be, what does it do to a person who consciously makes the decision to purchase another human being for sex?
Here's another question. Are nail salons still a significant venue for trafficked women? At a past Common Hour on human trafficking, we learned about a UPS delivery person who reported that he was delivering a lot of packages from Victoria's Secret to a local Lancaster nail salon. And indeed, the owners were arrested for human trafficking. This is from a staff member.
Yeah, we don't have research to address that conclusively. I will say that I've actually visited some nail salons that were rumored. This is earlier on. Now I know a little bit better not to do those types of things, where we suspected that there was human trafficking. And typically, until you can get enough information, it's hard to go in and try to do an arrest. They're a little more difficult than a massage place, because massage place typically involves, you know, people in various degrees of undress. You know, it's easier to prove something that is sexual in nature. So I don't have any stats or research to support that. We haven't done enough work in that area. I would say, yes, they occur. And I would say, if you can see that there are people that are not speaking English in there, you know, a lot of the international trafficking comes from, you know, the Asian communities, Asian countries. So it could be suspect. It would be difficult for us to make that determination or have that kind of hunch without following up. I have actually been to places where I felt that there was enough there that I felt that there was something not right, and I have contacted the police and they investigated. I mean, the other thing, it's difficult for me to say this, but there has been in the past an issue with law enforcement not making the arrest because law enforcement were also part of the buying community.
When you said that you learned it was not a good idea to intervene too early, you mean because then they cover up the business or move it somewhere else?
That, but more importantly, the woman would be beaten. You know, when I walked into a massage place and I asked to set up an appointment for a massage, she spoke English and she said, yes, what time? And then I started asking more questions, and there was a curtain beside her, so I couldn't see what was on the other side of the curtain. And it was a very small massage area. It had all the signs of being illicit massage business. As soon as I started asking her more questions, she stopped speaking English and she started speaking in her foreign language. And then I knew that something was wrong and that she would be put in a compromised position if she shared too much, if her body language gave too much away, if I got more suspicious. So her job at that point, she was told, get rid of me, get me out of there, or she could be beaten.
Right. Here's another question from a student at F&M. As a woman, I'm painfully aware of the burden that falls on us to protect ourselves. What can we do to educate men and convince them that their behavior is abhorrent and to put the burden on them to change?
You know, there's been a lot of research in that area as well, and I don't know that I have specific answers to that question other than showing what these girls and women look like after being trafficked and how they've been so demoralized. They're basically reduced to animals, desperate for food, desperate for a warm place to sleep. If we can get men to understand that when you view pornography, it is not a victimless crime, those women are being raped. Those women's bodies are being torn and ripped and injured and bleeding. Until we get men to understand that it is not a simple choice of having a woman allegedly agree to having sex with you because you give her money. There is somebody there waiting and watching to see how much money she brings home. You know, in Wilmington, Delaware, we have a bus that drops off women at midnight from Russia, from a Russia mob, organized crime. They drop them off and they tell them, we're going to pick you up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you better have X amount of dollars with you. And if you don't, there will be repercussions. And that typically is beatings or torture, other forms of torture. So in order to get men to understand, I think we have to go to the graphic nature of what it is that these women are forced to endure. And I have to believe that most men, it would resonate with them knowing that 96%, and that's just based on research, we actually believe it's 100% of all women that are prostituted have been beaten, abused, and assaulted and raped as children. Who would ever not have compassion and love and care for a little girl or a little boy who never stood a chance? I spoke to one man and he actually said to me, you know, when I buy a woman and pay for sex, I always take her out to dinner and get her a nice bottle of wine. In his mind, he felt like he was offering her just this beautiful evening of giving her attention and giving her a nice meal. And that's the way he was able to somehow justify and rationalize using her body for his pleasure. As we heard earlier in the slide, to do whatever he wanted.
When you talk about the way they're abused as children, I wonder if maybe the support groups that have arisen around, victims of former clergy sex abuse might be a resource that would be interested in helping. I mean, especially to help with public education about that, the aspect of this that so traumatizes them while they're still kids.
The important part that you just said there was public education. I presented in front of 60 principals of both elementary and middle school. And of course, the presentation would be catered to the age group. It would not be graphic in nature, but it would help them understand, just like the book, good pictures, bad pictures, help them understand, what does it look like? How do you know if you're being lured in? All the things that they need to know. Of the 60 principals that I talked to that day, not one would agree to invite us in to have a conversation. The DA has said to me that parents would have an uprising against the school if we came in and we started talking about something like this, something like sex trafficking. Most of us, even a lot of my friends, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. It's too painful. So, if we tried to put this in the schools, which is where we have to be in these schools in elementary school. We have to be in churches. Churches don't want to hear presentations on this either. And I've spoken actually at my church several times in front of 2,000 people and helped them understand this. And it's hard. I had a woman stand up sobbing. She said, I'm a grandmother. I could cry just telling the story. She said, I have 2 little granddaughters. What can I do to keep them safe?
Yeah, we had a speaker here who was an HIV doctor who said the same thing about the difficulty getting into churches to talk about the subject. The images that you showed, serial images of what a girl looked like when she was, before she was trafficked, and then, showing the physical and psychological degradation as the process went on. That should be a poster up on every college campus in the country with your website and an emergency phone number at the bottom of the poster. I think that would reach men to see images like that and to really understand what the process does to a human being. Here's another question from a student. To what extent does legalizing prostitution affect sex trafficking? Namely, do countries with legalized prostitution or regions like in Las Vegas in the US, do they see less sex trafficking? Is legalizing and regulating prostitution one of many possible strategies to help combat sex trafficking? Or is prostitution in and of itself problematic?
That's a great question. I'm really glad somebody asked that question. So let's take a look at Amsterdam. When they legalized prostitution, the demand substantially increased, because what that said to the community and to the culture is, this is acceptable. It is legal, so that men who were not having sex with prostituted women now found it to be perfectly within their rights to do that. So they found that the traffickers now had to bring in more women to sell them illegally to keep up with the demand. In every single area where there is legalized prostitution, there is an increase of human trafficking. And getting back to the next question of whether it should be legalized or not, here's the biggest danger. There would be unlikely as many investigations into human trafficking. They would be much more difficult to identify. There would be far less reporting. If something is legal, most people aren't going to be caring about the signs of something that looks unusual, and they're certainly not going to be reporting it, because they're going to say, okay, well, this is now legal. It would be the biggest setback and the most dangerous legislation for the protection and health of women.
I think we have time to squeeze in one last question. We're almost at the end of our time. Or maybe it's a comment, but it's certainly inviting your response. This comes from an anonymous attendee who says, it's incredibly insulting to erase the experiences of people who do sex work by choice and who are not the victims of abuse. Painting with a broad brush does not serve the cause. It's propaganda that makes people take the cause less seriously. And nothing is so unnuanced. Response?
You know, I get that every time I do a presentation to college students. And my response to that would be, do the research, take a look at it. I just gave you the quote and the research of 96% of people that are being sold for sex are broken little girls. And I'll also describe it the way Mary DeFusco, who runs the Public Defender's Office of Philadelphia, expressed it to me. It is outrageous to think that your profession of prostitution, if that's what you want to call it, as legitimate work, often requires police protection from your customers, and you typically go to work drunk or high. Now, if we care about these women, I am not going to turn away and not watch and not care about their well-being, even if they may think this is legitimate work. Being beaten by someone that you are offering services to who has said, I'm buying you because I have the right to do with you whatever I want. That is not legitimate work, and we don't care about these people if we continue to advocate for their rights. It would be as if we took any other psychological issue and ignored it and only let them be the voice, which is the outcome of that trauma. And that's what it would be doing, to continue to in any way support something that will hurt them.
Well, considering in the gravity of the subject, I'm really sorry to say that we're out of time. I feel like this deserves so much more attention. And there is another question in the queue, but perhaps I'll see if I can pass that along to you by email. Okay. I want to thank again our presenter, Susan Ingram. I want to thank Emily again for interpreting this week with her usual grace and sophistication. I want to thank Lauren for proposing this event, and the audience for your focused attention. And I'd like to remind you all again to join us next week for Robin Cohen's talk, How to Go Far and Take Others with You. This is certainly one of the more important common hours I think we've had anytime recently. Thanks again so much for everything.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.